computer. Hello, computer. Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. What do you mean you can't read that? What's wrong with you? Get your monocle, binoculars out. Oh, thank you. Okay, for the session, I'm going to be reading Ben Nadell's Feature Flags. Feature Flags, page 1, dedicated to. Oh, well, what what was the movie about Andy Kaufman? Man on the Moon. He goes to do a show and he just reads the whole book. Anyway, I wasn't actually starting, or is it time? Is it time to start? Oh, I don't think it is. You're a bad influence, Mark. Okay, so how long do I have? Are these hour-long sessions? 50 minutes? I can just wait until you yell at me. It's a 25-minute session? 45-minute? Do I hear an hour? He will give me 2 hours. Okay. Are you all ready? Oh, good. Cool. Well, it's good to be back at CFCamp, one of my favorite conferences. There's so many cheese options. And always a fish option as well. The restaurant's so good. I did kind of like Municon. I know. I only was here for 2 years, I think, when it was at the airport. That was nice, but this is more homely, you know. I don't know. So BoxLang. So BoxLang.io is our first production BoxLang website. It's very simple. My laptop is not charging. Maybe the power strip is turned off. Oop, there we go. Now I'm charging. So as far as getting up and running, the main point of a session is just to kind of get an introduction on what it looks like to maybe test and play with. I didn't test anything I'm going to demo, so who knows if it works. If it's broken, I'll blame Luis. I'll tell him he broke it last night. So just to show you, first of all, if you go to boxlang.io, I can't make the URL any bigger. This is mostly just a marketing website of things, but we do have all of our downloads here. You can play around right away with our try.boxlang. That's small. Can I make it bigger? Oh, party foul. I can make the code bigger, but it doesn't make the window bigger. All right, I'm going to yell at somebody after the session, like, come on, guys. But basically, man, that's so small. It's so small. You can come in here and basically kind of run any code that you want. This is just running on the BoxLang core jar, so there's no form scopes or URL scopes or any kind of web-centric stuff. BoxLang does have an application scope and a request scope that's just part of the core. Because you can build an application that's a console application, right? It doesn't have to be a web application. And you also have the vague idea of a request. Even if I type 2 plus 2 at the REPL, I'm requesting BoxLang to run some code. So there's still a request scope that lives for the duration. It's not a web request. But some of those things still made sense to be just a core feature. So you can define applications. You can even have a session in just the core of BoxLang without the web, because you could have a terminal session for Telnet, right? Sessions aren't inherently web, so there's a few concepts that are still part of the core. But if you want to come play with a few things, oops, not 2 equals 2. You can just type code here. So every time you click run, this actually goes off and runs an AWS Lambda, which seems to be slow today. Usually it's instant. The joys of using Lambda. There we go. Okay, now it's fast. Sometimes the lambdas shut down and have to start up again. But anything that you output should show up in the buffer here. So test is basically the buffer. There's still a concept of an output buffer that's core to BoxLang, even if you're not doing it in the web. The context, if you use write output or echo, which is the same thing, it still goes into a buffer in the context. But at the end of the request, if you're in the CLI, we just flush the buffer to the console, to system.out. So when I use echo test and I'm running this inside of a console application, then the buffer just comes out as the system output. So that way, we came up with abstractions for things that to work even outside of a test. And then the eval will actually return the result of whatever the last expression is. So you notice the eval went blank when I added the echo, but if I put the 2 plus 2 back at the end, just whatever the last expression is what gets returned. Unfortunately, when I zoom, it does not zoom the bottom part. I apologize. I've never tried zooming this website before. So you can play here if you want to. This is going to parse the code as BoxLang code, not ColdFusion code. So if you wanted to try something specific to BoxLang, you can do that. So back to the site. If you want to play around with BoxLang, all right, how do I get back? There we go, BoxLang home. The downloads that we have, different runtimes. So BoxLang OS, that's basically just the core jar. The language, like if you were to download, Node or Python or some other language, this would be the equivalent. There's no web components here. It's basically just a standalone jar that you can run. Let's try it out. Let's download it. How fast is the conference Wi-Fi? It's only 6 megabytes. So who knew 6 megs could download so slowly? I think my antivirus is probably scanning it. Here we go. So BoxLang 1.0.all. So if can I get Windows just to open up a terminal here? Come on, Windows. Windows 11. Nothing's easy. See, Mishi was complaining about Windows 11 yesterday. I really hate in Windows 11, you right-click and you get this little idiot menu. Like, give me the real menu, not the fake menu. It's like they made Windows 11 for my mom to use or something. Can I zoom in here? Oh, look, Windows Terminal doesn't suck too bad anymore. Took Windows long enough. For starters, I should actually back up. You have to have Java 21 if you want to run BoxLang, right? And it does right now need to be the JDK, not the JRE. And the reason is because currently when we compile the code, we transpile it to Java source code, and then we use Java C to compile that to bytecode. So the JDK is required for that. As soon as we're finished with the straight to bytecode, which is a lot of work, I'm sure you can ask Misha. Bytecode sucks. As soon as we're finished with that, then you'll be able to use a JRE because we don't need the Java C. But for now, you will need Java 21 and JDK. So you run it like you would any other jar. I have way too many jars in this folder. So it's my downloads folder. What was it? BoxLang 1.0 all. There we go. So if you just run it, I have spelled it wrong. BoxLang dash. Oh, I was just keeping you guys on your toes. Good job. So if you run it with no arguments, then we can just play around. And so you don't really need to do any installation. The jar file is all self-contained. There's really nothing that it unpacks onto disk per se. So all the libraries and everything just stay bundled inside of it. We really wanted to do that for portability. But there is some things that may get written by default under your user home. You can customize the home directory for servers and things, but if you just run the jar, any kind of log files or things will just go under userhome.boxlang, which is what you'd get with most other languages. So like the bytecode that's generated will go here under the classes directory, right? If there's log files, they'll go here. We also have conventions. You can install modules into this folder, and they'll automatically get picked up and used. There's a lib folder. Actually, I apologize. I keep forgetting to make this bigger. How do I make it bigger? I don't know how to make it bigger. Extra large icons. Whoa. Whoa. Chunky. It's like playing with Duplo blocks. The text is still the same size. Like, come on, Windows. I didn't want to see the icon. Okay, so there will be some items that are under basically your user home by default. There's a version.properties, which just has the version. Right now, all the versions are 1.0 snapshot, but we have a build date is there as well. And so when you run it with no parameters, it basically drops you in the REPL. And so kind of like the try BoxLang site, you can run singular expressions 2 plus 2. I think I should be able to echo something out. Oh no, it's angry. Oh, because I typed a double quote followed by a single quote. Sorry. So the REPL works like the REPL with most languages. We also have the ability to run a file. Let me go back to my downloads folder. If I was smart, I would have actually had a folder with like demos ready to go, but I am not smart. So can I just open up code here? Maybe? Hello, VS Code. Oh, I'm trying to open the jar. Let me take the jar and slap it into my sandbox folder. Windows 11. Okay, this will be a little bit easier to play than in my downloads folder where I have everything under the sun. So just to show then, if now I should be able to open up VS Code here. Open. If I create a test.bxs file for script, then I can put my code in here. And now if I do java-jar, then I should be able to just reference my file and execute it directly from the command line. Oh, it didn't output anything. That's too bad. Oh, that's right, because when you execute a file, I don't output the last expression like I would normally. You can also do ad hoc code like this, where you can also pipe in a file, or you can just pass it inside of a string. And in this case, we output the result of the expression. We mostly support the same things that like Node and Ruby and Python and the other languages do from their command line. So this is fun to play around with, but you're probably most interested in starting up an actual server. Since if you're looking to test some Cold Fusion code, you obviously are most likely used to doing that inside of a server. So that is where some of the other downloads come into play. So the mini server, which is actually embedded inside of VS Code, so there's not even much of a reason to download the mini server separately, because VS Code just automatically, the VS Code extension has this installed. And to show you that, you just need to go to the marketplace and search for BoxLang. Our extension is a fork, basically, of the Kama-sama K CFML extension. So it does everything that one already did, and then we just added all of our functionality on top of that. It seemed like a pretty good starting point. So when you install the BoxLang extension, then it automatically bundles the BoxLang jar inside of it, which is how it's able to start servers. But if you wanted to download the mini server directly, you can do that. Comes inside of a zip file. Oh, see, the download actually has a zip file, and we have a little bin folder. You can add that to the path of your computer if you want to be able just to run BoxLang mini server, or you can just grab the jar. At the end of the day, it's the same thing. So if I go, I already have it open here. So if I were to drop in BoxLang mini server, you notice this is slightly larger. It's 10 megabytes. So this basically bundles Undertow, which is the same thing you use in command box, but the mini server has no servlet. It's just a pure Java server. And so inside of BoxLang, we have an interface that basically interfaces with everything to get the form variables, the URL variables, the file uploads, the request body and everything. And then we have multiple implementations of the interface. So the web support module, which has all the BIFs and tags for web stuff, just compiles against the interface. And we have an Undertow implementation that knows how to get that data directly from Undertow, and we have a servlet implementation that knows how to get that data from servlet. So even the core of BoxLang doesn't know anything about servlet, which makes it very easy to still support the old servlet version and the new servlet version, because we have a kind of a barrier there where we can implement different versions of it. So running the mini server is super easy. You could also do java-jar, and then we just run the mini server. You can specify, it's very simple, you can specify the web root, you can specify the port, and debug mode, a config file path, and a custom server home, or basically like the 4 or 5 things you can configure. It's not really designed to be like a production server. It's not the full functionality of command box or the rewrites and everything, but it starts up in like half a second. There we go, 537 milliseconds to start up. And so then if I go to localhost port 8080, I have my mini server running, which I should be able to, very angry. Looks like I have a bug there. Should be able just to like basically run things. That's essentially the same functionality you get when you have the mini servers that you just create here. It's just using the same jar, but it gives you a little nicer interface. This was actually not working the other day. Let me test and see if it's working now. There's a lot of bugs we've been fixing. Okay, yeah, so that works now. So that is the exact same thing as the java-jar command that I ran. So this is great for simple testing if you want to play around, and it prevents you from having to manually download the jar. You do need to have VS Code using Java 21, of course, for those things. So stop server. So a more likely useful scenario for you is, just using it inside a command box, because a lot of people are already familiar with command box. And this uses the servlet version of our runtime as well. If you like to play with Docker, we also have the Docker container. For local stuff, I really like just using command box. The next version of command box will have some better support built into it. But for right now, there's a module you need to install in the command box called command box BoxLang, and that basically makes command box aware that BoxLang is a thing. Otherwise, if you try to start it, it'll say, hey, you're only allowed to start Rilo, Adobe, and Lucy servers, because that's the only type of ColdFusion servers it knows about. So that module lets it know that BoxLang is another ColdFusion server type. So once you do that, basically we have a new CF engine type of BoxLang, enhance. And so this just maps to our ForgeBox package. So we have Lucy versions, we have Adobe versions, all on ForgeBox. And now we also have BoxLang versions. So every time that we run a build, we automatically push like you're used to. So when you're starting a BoxLang server, this is where it's pulling from, which is a really terrible description. The command box engine for BoxLang. I should make that better. So testing with a command box engine is basically you install the command box BoxLang module. I spelled install wrong. Tab completion only works if you know how to spell. Command box BoxLang. So I already have it installed. I guess I'll run it again just for the fun of it. And then we start CF engine equals BoxLang. And since command box can automatically manage our Java versions, then I can tell it I want you to be on OpenJDK 21. I don't need all that. Just want to tell it needs to be a JDK, not a JRE. So this will tell command box automatically to download Java 21 if it needs to ensure you run it on the right version. So this gives you more of the typical server you're used to if you have rewrites or you have an existing server.json with libdirs or special ports or SSL certs, any of that stuff you want to do. This will give you more of a traditional workflow for starting and stopping things. So we like the mini server just because it's so tiny and self-contained, and that's what we embed in the extension. But chances are, if you were to, why does this show adobe.zip? What have I done? Oh, you want to know why? It's because I'm in my sandbox folder, and I probably previously started a server here. It was in the wrong folder. Yeah. I previously was testing a server in this folder. Sorry. I thought I was in a different folder. Server, forget. Oh, jeez, it's angry. It's angry. Go over here and try the same thing. See if I'm in the right folder now. Try my start command over here. I was starting that Adobe server the last time I was testing an update. So, there we go. Now it's downloading BoxLang. Yeah, I was just restarting an old server in the other folder. So that's how we can start it up with command box. That's really, well, so I guess I'll show some of the CLI commands. As far as just being able to get in and play around and test, the easiest thing is probably for a super duper simple test, just use the VS Code extension and just tell it start me a server. If you want to maybe play around with an existing application, then you can use the command box server, which will use some of the other configuration files you're probably familiar with. So there's a handful of tools. Let me actually see. I don't know if we have all of them documented just yet. The documentation for BoxLang is all over here at ortusbooks.com. All of our documentation is at ortusbooks. Usually it's the name of the product, .ortusbooks. So in this case, it's boxlang.ortusbooks.com. Trying to get it to zoom. Ugh. It zooms, but then it cuts off the menu. Why is zooming so hard? I guess that's because I need to do this. So this book started as a copy of the Modern CFML book. We've been going through and updating it for everything related to BoxLang. But it also has some guides that kind of cover the same things. We have an installer for Windows. If you're an installer type of person, I don't know. I don't really care. Some people like an installer. The Windows installer will add it to your path automatically, so you can just run the BoxLang binary wherever you are. And this also shows, how to run the REPL, how to run a file, the same basic things that I was just showing you, which are all pretty straightforward. Oh yeah, see, so you can pipe code. I didn't show that. Supports all those things. Oh, and it also has all the command line arguments that you can use from the command line as well. And I wanted to see if we had documentation in here yet for our CLI commands. I don't know if I do. Here's the docs in our JSR 223 scripting. That's always fun to play around with. Docs on the Lambda. It's weird because I didn't write most of his docs, so I don't actually know what's in here. Using someone else's docs. Oh, we do have this. Oh, it was under IDE and tooling. Well, that's kind of crap. It doesn't actually tell you anything. I'll have to update this. Okay, it looks like we basically have docs that say it's here and we have nothing. All right, well, that's kind of embarrassing. I'll have to update those. Maybe I can do that today to actually update how these work. So to show you really quick, let's just experiment. If I was smart, I would have had these ready to go. So using just the chord jar, I can run the. I have to look it up since it's not in the docs. Go to my BoxLang repo. Where's my feature audit? So I have a handful of basic command line tools. We'll probably find a way to package these a little bit nicer in the future. But for right now, you can just run these directly as Java classes. Oops. Bortus. And so this is just feature audit. So by default, this will scan all the files in the current directory, which is basically the test.bxs file. And so it parses all the files, and then it tells you what BIFs you're using, which the only thing I'm using is the echo BIF, and it's on line 1. So if I were to go into my little test file and I was to add, write dump, and then I was to add, I don't know, what's a BIF? Array len. Right, and that was to go rescan. Then it would find all of those. So now it would tell me these are the 3 things that you're using and what line numbers are on. So it'll recursively scan a whole folder of code, and I need to add a help option to it to show you the options it supports. Since our docs are non-existent for that right now, you could have a source attribute where you can point to a specific file or a specific folder. And then my favorite one is you can have it tell you specifically what BIFs or tags are missing from BoxLang that's in your source code. So let me think, what's a BIF we haven't added yet in BoxLang? Probably like image rotate. We're still working on the image rotate library. So if I come in here and I rerun my feature audit and I say show me only the missing features, it'll scan the file, and now it doesn't tell me about echo or write dump or arrayln because those are all implemented. But it says, well, you're using image rotate on line 7 of test.bxs, and that is a missing BIF. So that would let you know, okay, well, I can't run my app yet until we've implemented image rotate. This gets more useful if you're scanning like your entire project. If you play with this, send me any compiler errors that you might get. I think we've worked a lot of them out. There's a lot of weird little syntaxes that ColdFusion allows sometimes that we may not fully support. There's also an aggregate flag, and we can get a summary, which is kind of dumb with a single file. But if you scan 100 files, it combines all the results into just one big aggregate list. And so, it processed one file. It was a BXS, and this is all the missing BIFs across all of them. Missing tags show up as well. And then there's also the ability to output a CSV file. So you can use the report file flag, and you can just give it a CSV, and it'll write that out automatically. I recommend, just if you want to kind of play around running this against your code, and I'll try to get those docs updated with this actual command. We had this stuff documented internally in our pre-release, but it hasn't all made it out to the public documentation yet, unfortunately. But this will kind of let you know what's missing. We also have the transpiler, which I should be able to use quite simply. So if I need a ColdFusion file for it to transpile, duh. So this will be a really lame example because it won't need to change anything. But if I change this file to be test.cfs for ColdFusion script, and then I delete the BoxLang version of it. I don't know why I didn't just rename the file. That was a really circuitous method, wasn't it? If I say transpile the test.cfs file, it'll parse it. Oh, no, I have a problem. Oh, I have to tell it where to put it. I'll just tell it, write it out as test. It'll put the extension on there for me. So it parses the test.cfs file, creates the abstract syntax tree out of it, and then basically pretty prints that abstract syntax tree back out as BoxLang code. So now I have a BXS file which has all the same code that the ColdFusion file has. Now, the code is exactly the same because the script syntaxes are nearly identical. It's slightly more interesting if you have a class or you have tag-based code. One interesting note in BoxLang is we don't allow tag-based classes because we think that's kind of dumb. Well, maybe not dumb, but we don't like it. If we were to write a language today, we'd say, you know what, classes are script only. You want a template, HTML, and tags, great, but classes, those should be script. So if you have a tag-based CFC in ColdFusion, here, let's just try it. If you have a tag-based CFC in ColdFusion, when we convert that to BoxLang code, it turns into script because that's how we're trying to be a bit more opinionated on those things. So CF component. Ugh. I'm bad at writing tag code now. I write scripts so often. Oh, sorry. I did it in the other VS Code window, but not here. Ooh, look, Copilot has some suggestions for me. Did Copilot give me valid code? I don't know. I only halfway trust Copilot. It's kind of handy, but it doesn't always work correctly. I can't read that, but there's some kind of time remaining. All right, so let's try this one. So if I come in here, I can say the source is going to be myclass.cfc, and I should make the target default to the same thing. If you're doing a whole folder of code, then what I recommend is the source could just point to the folder, and then the target points to another folder, and they'll just recreate the same directory structure in the new folder. I'm just doing it on a single file, but if you wanted to try, an entire application, then that would work. It yelled at me because I tried to tell it to use a CFC extension, which is not correct. It should be a BX extension. Oh, no, looks like I have invalid syntax. What did I do wrong? Mismatched input CF, expecting CF. Let's see. What did I do wrong? Oh, CF functions. That's what happens when you trust Copilot. Actually, I typed that. I can't blame Copilot on that. There we go. So now it has created the BoxLang version of this class, which is myClass.bx. And so now it's converted to script. So the component turned into BX. Right now it's putting all the annotations up top using this new syntax. I do have plans to try to retain some of those in line based on how we're declared. But here we have, the same equivalent. As one little caveat, whenever you transpile tag-based Cold Fusion code to CF script, anywhere where you're outputting, any white space in tag code is essentially an output, unless it's like between an opening function and the first argument or something. And so you wind up with these echo statements all over that have nothing but white space. So when you're converting tag-based code, if there's a buffer output that's only white space, we just omit it. We assume it's probably not important, unless you had output equals true, I think. But anyway, so it won't represent things that were output automatically. But if I were to go to my tag-based code, and I'm say I'm just outputting things, then if I convert this file to BoxLang, then you see that represents, an echo statement, and this white space is exactly as the white space was represented in the original source code. So anyway, you can play around with that. The code transpiler is definitely a beta sort of tool. It should retain all the information. If you find any bugs, let me know. But this would be, you kind of have two options, right? You can take Cold Fusion code, you can run it as is on BoxLang, and it will just transpile on the fly. Or if you say, hey, I want to try some new fun BoxLang things like, importing JavaLang system, right? You can't do this in Cold Fusion code, so you can manually change it over to BoxLang, or you can use our transpiler to do that as well. There's also there's a compiler as well. I won't bother demoing it. It basically does an in-place compilation, like Lucy and Adobe both do. I think Adobe does it, where it leaves the CFM file, but it just changes it to be bytecode. So if you were to open it in Notepad, you would just see bytecode inside. And then when you go to run it, BoxLang, just like the other CF engines do, will look at it and say, hey, this isn't source code, this is bytecode. And it just, it class loads it and runs it. That's for in-place compilations. Still working out some bugs on that. That gets tricky, especially since Cold Fusion allows multiple mappings that can point to the same physical path. So it's a little fun doing that. Those are the main CLI tools that we have. Just to show you an example of the transpiler. Since I talked so much about the visitors, I'll quickly show you this. This is our transpiler visitor, which is a Java class, and this is what is used behind the scenes when you run a Cold Fusion file. So we parse the Cold Fusion with Antler, we build the AST, and then we run this visitor across it. And so you can see in here I have rules set up. We renamed the AST function to be ASCII and the CHR function to be char because we thought that made a lot more sense to us, right? Deserialized JSON is finally as it should have been, JSON deserialized, right? And so we have, our names in BoxLang and the names that Cold Fusion use. We also have variable names that we transpile, right? Largely things that involve CF turn into BX. And we even have like tag settings. If you have a CF setting tag and you have enable CF output only, well on BoxLang we just call it enable output only, right? We take the CF out of it. And so we transpile that automatically. CF invoke, the component turns into class. We've renamed that attribute. So your Cold Fusion code will still run because the transpiler handles that. So the transpiler visitor basically has a little method that visits each type of AST node. So if you have a class in your code, then I have code that merges all of your docs and annotations together. Because in Cold Fusion, your documentation, your annotations all just get into one big struct, right? Which kind of sucks. In BoxLang, we keep those separate. But if you're transpiling code, we put them all back together. So you still get the same behavior. So it's kind of fun just to look in here and see the sort of things. One of my favorite ones is we have, where is it? Oh, here's a fun one. Uppercase struct key literals. So in Cold Fusion, right, you get, uppercase struct keys by default. And of course, there's settings to turn that off, which many people do. In BoxLang, the default is lowercase. So you declare a variable, it's lowercase by default. So instead of having a flag in the runtime, we use the transpiler instead. So anytime you have a variable that you're accessing, let's see if I can find the right function that does it. Box class. It's hard to scroll when the code is so big. Blah, blah, blah. Here we go. So array access. Nope, that's not the one I want. Here we go. So like box.access, which would be like foo. Got off my screen. Foo.bar, right? So we expect bar to be uppercase if it's Cold Fusion code. So anywhere you have something in your code, I run it through this uppercase.access, which basically takes the second variable and just uppercases the name of the identifier. So that way, we don't have to have a flag in the runtime. The transpiler just changes your code on the fly. And the other thing I was going to show you was, the is null. We have null support active. This is a little bit harder to read just because of the boilerplate. We have null support basically on by default in BoxLang, right? And so one of the things we do is if you have code, Cold Fusion code that looks like this, struct key exists, foo, bar, right? We transpile that automatically to not is null, foo dereferencing bar, because that'll work with full null support being on, but struct key exists won't work the way you expect. So we've tried to avoid flags in the runtime as much as possible, and any problems we can solve with the transpiler, we try to just do it at the source code. That way, once it reaches the bytecode, there's no runtime flags doing that. But with the AST, changing the actual code on the fly is quite easy. So all of your struct key exists get turned into it. And if you run your code through the transpiler CLI tool, you'll see any struct key exist calls will be swapped out for a not is null call. That way it'll run properly on BoxLang like you expect. So I really love the AST. It was a lot of fun stuff. Since this is Java code, there's a little bit of boilerplate that goes along with that. But that is there. Okay, so I only have a few minutes left. I think I covered all the basic things you need to know. The documentation being at boxlang.ortus books, and essentially how to run things from the REPL and from command box and from the mini server. I'd love to talk more about the architecture, but I'll talk all day and we're almost out of time. So let me take any questions you guys may have. I'm sure you're probably wondering things or curious how we handled something. What questions do you guys have about BoxLang or just how to start testing some things on it? Ooh. Sold $1,000. No. Yes. Right, okay, so the question was how does request scope and application scope work if you're just in a CLI context? It's not stored specifically in thread local, but it is unique to that thread. So we handle context very differently in BoxLang. In Cold Fusion, you have get page context, right? Well, the page context is part of a JSP specification, which is tied to servlet, which we have no concept of. So we still have a context in BoxLang, but we actually have many contexts. So instead of one context that just lives for the whole page, we have a runtime context, an application context, a session context. Every time a function calls, a function context. And we've broken them out into individual little unique pieces, and each context tracks only the variables that it cares about. So when you're inside of a function, you're using the function context, and it knows about the arguments and local scope of the function. And each context knows about the parent up the chain. So when you look for an unscoped variable, we ask the closest context, can you find a variable of this name? And it looks in the scopes it knows about. And if it can't find it, it says, I don't have this, but hey, maybe my parent does. And it climbs up the chain until it finds a parent context that knows about it. So when you declare an application, either with the existence of an application.bx or just calling the CF application tag, it injects an application context into the hierarchy of context, which knows about the application scope. So now the application scope and variables inside of it can be found via that lookup chain. So there's a request context. which we have different flavors of. We have a CLI scripting request and we have a web request, which share a similar superclass, and they have a request scope. But the web request version also has URL and form and CGI. So the request scope just lives in that request context, which is created at the beginning, and all the code executes as some sort of child of that context, and then can therefore see that scope. So if you're in a CLI context and you have the CF application tag or BX application, and you declare an application, we inject the application context into the hierarchy, and if session management's enabled, we inject a session context. And so now the application and session variables just magically come into existence because they now exist in that lookup. So that allowed us to be completely modular, so the core of BoxLang doesn't need to know about all the possible scopes. I can write a module that creates a Brad scope, right? And it's just as core as any other scope in the language. All I need to do is inject my own context into a chain of parents that knows about the Brad scope, and now I can use that scope in my code just like I would anything else. So the only three scopes the core of BoxLang knows about are variables, request, and server. Those are the only three scopes guaranteed to always exist no matter where you are. Every other scope is added if and when a special context of that type gets added into the chain. So in that way, we can be completely modular and have the core know about as little as possible. We have a mechanism to be able to look up any scope or any variable at runtime. And so it's really the context hierarchies that define the application scope or the server scope or the request scope. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, we can chat more at the booth. Good question, though. Any other questions?
One question.
Yeah.
You said you use Java C compiler, so you still produce Java source code and you then compile to binary code?
Right now, yes. Yeah, and we did that to get started because it was faster and easier to debug. And then we have in progress right now the work to create the bytecode directly. The Java C is very slow, unfortunately, but it'll be much faster when we go straight to bytecode. And if you want to look at it, Luis showed you the ability to right-click in the IDE and say, show me the Java source code. If you look under the classes folder in your BoxLang home, we're also writing the Java file here as well. Eventually, we'll get rid of this. But for now, you can also look at the Java file for anything. We just write it alongside the class file. And then there's also, until we do the bytecode, we also have a JSON file which maps all of the Cold Fusion line numbers with Java line numbers. Because when we generate bytecode directly, we can control the line number table. But when we use Java C, we have to manually map those for the error messages. But yeah, so that's what we're doing intermediate, and then eventually once we go straight to bytecode, it'll be much faster and it won't require the JDK. Yeah, totally. It was easier to get going, but we were surprised how slow the Java C is when you do that. Yeah, great questions. Anything else? Okay, perfect. Oh, yes. Yes, so right now we don't have any web-based administrator like you're used to. We support right now already the application.cfc, this.data sources. That's one of the easiest ways, and you will need to install the module for whatever driver you need. So we have, like Derby, MySQL, MariaDB, Hypers thing. You can install these directly with CommandBox. When you start a CommandBox server, there is a CommandBox home just like you're used to under the CommandBox folder. Server, so here's a BoxLang server, and the class files for that server go under here, and then there's also a modules directory, which is where you would install those two. But you can just use the install command directly in CommandBox, and just like it does with Lucy or the CFPM command with Adobe, it'll automatically install the module into the server home. We also have our own JSON file, which is great because Lucy has also moved to JSON as opposed to XML. So we have our own JSON file mimicking CFconfig that they can go in as well. But anyway, I think I'm out of time now. So if you have any more questions, I would love to talk to you at the booth or play around or look at bugs or talk about bytecode. But thank you for coming.